topic I'd like to share with you today is about managing emotional triggers. Now, emotional triggers play a very important and significant role in our lives and particularly in our relationships. And they can be a very useful tool for us, just like a torch we carry in the dark, or they can become weapons of pain and ruin. Now, most of us to date have experienced emotional triggers. We all have them, but we have experienced the negative side of them. And hence, it's time for us to examine them from a different perspective. And let's start by trying to understand what emotional triggers are. Now, according to the published literature, and I'm sure that there is a lot of psychologists, psychotherapists out there, world specialists, who, what I'm about to share with you does not necessarily go exactly that route, but I'm trying to show you a slightly different perspective today. But the published literature says emotional triggers are automatic responses to the way others express emotions like anger or sadness. So they're an automatic response within us. For example, you may not have a problem interacting with an angry person, but you find it hard to deal with someone who's crying, so your response is different. Emotional triggers always stir up our own emotional response. So this is the published, recognized definition. And it's good. And I think if we consider viewing emotional triggers as being more than just a reaction to the emotions of others, then I think we can explore the subject from a little broader perspective. And I think emotional triggers can also be a response to situations and circumstances that do not comply with our own sense of what is right or wrong, our expectations, or our own moral compass, for example. Those can trigger us too. So let us add this into the mix to broaden the definition of emotional triggers. And, again, I may be broadening it away from what the core science says, but for the purpose of our reflection today, that's the part I'd like to focus on. Now, according to published literature, some of the common emotional triggers include someone rejecting you, so you have an emotional response, someone leaving you or the threat that they will leave you, helplessness over painful situations, someone discounting or ignoring you, someone being unavailable to you, someone giving you a disapproving look, someone blaming or shaming you. My dear friends, most of us have experienced some of these triggers as described above. And by and large, most of them are hurtful in nature. Now, most of these are emotional responses to the emotions of others. And each of us reacts to these situations in our own unique ways. However, my purpose today is to look at a potentially different dimension of emotional triggers, from a perspective of how life unfolds before us. And what is life trying to tell us? What is life trying to teach us? So I'm broadening this definition beyond the textbook. And the question we need to ask is, why do we embody these triggers at all? Remember, in nature never creates anything without a purpose. And purpose always has two sides, positive and negative. Now, we're all familiar with the negative sides of our emotional triggers because we have all let them manifest in given situations. And we have followed the strong responses they sometimes emit, leading to events and experiences that may have impacted our health, our well-being, and the well-being of others. Therefore, this subject does merit further introspection. So let's go back to the basics, because we want to explore it from the perspective of what is life trying to tell us. So what is the cycle of life? And in my book, Parables from the Origin, it opens with this dedication which says, the origin, which is our source, our creator, is light. Light brings life. Life brings experience. Experience brings knowledge. and knowledge is light. And that is the full circle of life. The origin is light, light brings life, life brings experience, experience brings knowledge, and knowledge is light. So we are all here in this world, blessed with life by our Creator, to gain experience from events, from relationships, inner and outer exploration of ourselves, and a lot more. But this experience, once understood, internalized, and reflected upon, becomes knowledge. And knowledge is light. Now, when we start life, the other best analogy I can give you is when we start life, we are like the ray of the sun. You can tell the ray apart from its parent, the sun, because the ray is not as bright as its source. But then, as we gain knowledge from experiences, from the quality of experiences, best quality of experiences, as we gain knowledge, we gain more light. And the ray becomes brighter and brighter until at one point, it is so bright you cannot tell it apart from its source. And at that point, we will have gained completion, which various scriptures refer to as fulfillment, uniting with the primal being, annihilation, fana fi Allah, and other similar references. But all the scriptures, in some way or the other, allude to that state of completion. And so it's through gaining more and more knowledge that the ray becomes brighter and brighter till it's the same intensity as its source. That's the best analogy I can offer. So based on this understanding, let us take a closer look at experience. And my dear friends, time is the most valuable gift we are all blessed with. And we trade this precious time for our experiences and knowledge. Time depreciates every day. We all know it. It's not a secret. But the question to ask is, how are we spending this time? Are we getting the best quality of experience in return? This brings me to the tools we have at our hand to maximize the value of our time and quality of our experiences. Now, how can some of my emotional triggers help me maximize this value? Can they? Or how can my emotional triggers completely derail me and result in a severe deterioration of the quality of my experiences? That's our question today. And let's look at how our emotional triggers can help us, because we all know how we can be derailed. So let us listen to the wisdom of our favorite angels, Cyrus and Luminous, on this subject. And Cyrus and Luminous are lovely, friendly, enlightened angels who share some special knowledge with us. So I asked Cyrus about how one maximizes the quality of each experience in life. And he looked at me and replied, use all your tools correctly and be wise about what they give you in return. Use all your tools correctly and be wise about what they give you in return. Very profound. And Cyrus continued, you know you're here to gain experience, but ask yourself, what type of experience? Every event in your life gives you an experience. What are you meant to derive from it? And what actually are you deriving from it? What are you meant to derive from it? And what actually are you deriving from it? And Cyrus says, I once came across a large group of souls in the garden of the Creator who were preparing to take birth and manifest in this material world. And the big boss asked them, what are you going to do for each other in the world during your journey in that material world? What are you going to do for each other? And they all replied, we will be each other's teachers, so that we can discover the most from life and from one another while we are there. So we will become each other's teachers. And each one of us will manifest events and experiences to point one another to where the most valuable knowledge can be derived. It's wonderful. And Cyrus was impressed with their words and commitment, but he also knew how our material world works. So he waited for the big boss to leave and then said to this group of souls, each one of you will be given tools in the material world to help and guide yourselves and to guide one another. And these tools will be placed within you in the most special places, in your body, in your mind, and in your emotions. Use them wisely, because they can be the most helpful tools or the worst of weapons. It all depends on how you use them. Trust me, when you get there, you will find out. The group looked at Cyrus and goes, we will never forget our promise to each other. And Cyrus laughed and replied, trust me, you will, once you're born. And not only that, he said, you lot will also get up to a lot of mischief in that circus. And with that, they parted company. And Cyrus and Luminous have kept an eye on that group of souls. And not one of them has remembered to keep their promise, because they're just not aware of the pledge that they have made. Cyrus then looks at me and asks, do you know if you have fulfilled your part of the promise that all souls make to one another? About being teachers and students to one another? And I replied, I don't really know how successful I have been at it, but certainly as I get older, I seem to be seeing things more clearly and getting derailed less often by my tools. So I seem to be using them more to my benefit than to my detriment. Cyrus smiled because he seemed to like the fact that I had at least retained some awareness. So he decided to jog my memory further. He said, one of your very important lessons in this world is to gain as deep an understanding as you can of every soul you encounter. So he said, one of the very important lessons in this world is for you to gain as deep an understanding as you can of every soul that you encounter. And they come into your life for very good reasons. So every encounter, every soul we encounter comes with a very good reason. He says, you are an explorer. You are thirsty for knowledge, which you can best derive by understanding every soul that comes your way, which I thought was superb advice. And I paused for a moment and said, yes, you're absolutely right. Cyrus then took Luminous and me with him to the home of a middle-aged man from Jordan whose name is Musa. And he asked Luminous and me to stand in one corner and listen carefully to this conversation, because there was something in there that I had to learn. Now, Musa appears to be very angry and frustrated. So Cyrus asks him, what is the matter, my dear friend? Why are you so upset? And fuming, Musa replies, it's my housekeeper, Julius. I have been so kind and generous with him ever since he joined our household. He follows the Christian faith, and even though I'm not obliged by the law to give him time off at Christmas and Easter, I still do. I give him ample opportunity to celebrate his faith during every religious holiday. So I don't follow what the law calls for. I just give him that opportunity. So Cyrus said, that's very good. I'm really pleased to hear that. Musa says, I thought he appreciated my kind gestures, but obviously he doesn't. He said, at the end of Ramadan, when we celebrated Eid, I gave him the day off as required by national law, even though we could have done with his help that day and he wasn't celebrating the Muslim religious day. But he never offered to help and he just took off. And then to make matters worse, he shows up to work the next day after Eid and tells me he didn't have to come to work, but he did so just to help me out. Now, he knew that he was not legally entitled to a second day off because that was only for government employees. So he knew he wasn't entitled to one. But he still came up with this nonsense. And he said, I reminded him of all the time I had given him off when I was not required by the law. And he said, he just looked at me, shrugged his shoulders flippantly. He couldn't care less. His body language told me that he felt he was entitled to all that free time off. And so I blew a fuse, says Musa. So Cyrus asks Musa, how long have you been angry like this? 3 days? Musa nodded and said, and Cyrus asked, hasn't this affected your health? Your blood pressure? Musa nodded again, yes, it's not good. So Cyrus asked him, was any of this worth it? You have a lovely family who's also been miserable with you for 3 days. Who knows, you may have even brought yourself closer to a heart attack. So tell me, was any of your anger and misery necessary? After all, Musa, you are a smart man, and the issue you are fuming over is relatively small compared to the challenges most people face. So Musa paused and calmed down. He realized Cyrus had a point. Maybe he was overreacting. Cyrus then asked Musa, why do you think this man Julius is working in your home? Why him and nobody else? Musa didn't know the answer. So Cyrus said, I would say he is here to teach you many lessons. You are a smart man, Musa. Take a step back and tell me, if you were to step into Julius's head and look at the situation, what would you see? Musa had no idea how to respond. So Cyrus said, let me help you. He said, from everything you have told me, I've picked up the following key points. Now tell me if you agree. I've picked up that Julius is a taker. He takes all he can get and forgets everything he has received. Musa wholeheartedly agrees. Spot on. He says, I also see Julius is entitled. He feels you and the world owe him everything he gets. Absolutely, Musa replies. Then Cyrus says, and he is unappreciative. Musa replies, spot on, totally unappreciative. Then Cyrus says, and he has endless expectations. Musa nods his head vigorously. And then Cyrus says, and there is more. And Musa says, yes, lots more. So Cyrus says, okay, now for the first time, when you look at Julius, free of all emotions, you recognize how he is wired. You're all wired differently. For the first time, without emotions, you're recognizing how Julius is wired. So now you also know how to deal with him and others like him. The way I see it, he's actually taught you something, right? So Musa agrees. Not sure, but he agrees. He says that's exactly why he's here in your life, so that you can explore his behavior, understand his makeup, and then do what you need to achieve the best with him. Or if you can't do that, you can let him go. Not because you are angry, but because you are unable to deal with the way he is wired. That's why you're going to let him go. So Musa, Cyrus says, Musa, Julius is in fact your teacher. He is teaching you how to analyze people free of emotion, so that you can become a more intelligent employer. And maybe what you learn from him may save you from making much bigger mistakes. Or you may learn to be smarter in your approach and get more out of your relationship with people. That's what he's teaching you. This is part of what we have to learn from our experiences. Have you found similar problems with other people in your company, in your relationships? All the time, Musa says, all the time. This world is full of ungrateful people. Cyrus starts laughing. Is that really true, Musa? And Musa is not amused. He replies, heck yes, full of ungrateful people. So Cyrus says, so you would say that ungrateful people make you mad. And, Musa sort of steps back. Absolutely, he says, they make me livid. What else makes you mad? People who are entitled, he said. And my list is long. Should I continue? Musa too was laughing by now, because Cyrus's hearty laugh can be very infectious, and he realized that Cyrus had cornered him into this one spot. So he was calm, and he understood his predicament better. No need to continue, Cyrus says, because your list is so big, and if you lay it out here, everyone in the world would have to be like Mahatma Gandhi. And there was only one of him, and even he is not around anymore. So they both have a laugh. He says, now, Cyrus says, Musa, let us analyze you for a moment. We've talked about Julius. Let's take a look at you for a moment. You as a person live with a rigid definition of how people should be, which may or may not be reasonable. You have expectations of how people should think and behave, which may or may not be reasonable. You too are entitled, just like Julius. You feel entitled to the gratitude of others. And I can go on building my list, but the truth is that the best way for you to understand others is to start by understanding yourself. And this is something most of us don't do. The three things I've just mentioned to you about are examples of your emotional triggers. Once they are pulled, the whole situation goes only one way in your case, downhill for everyone. Worst of all you, because of your health condition. Remember, your emotional triggers are a blessing and not a curse if you know how to use them wisely. So let's go back, Cyrus says, and let's look at Julius once more, because I want you to understand your emotional triggers. And he says, now let us step into his head and see what he sees and understand how he thinks. Both agreed, Musa and Cyrus, that he is wired to be a taker. Okay? And so Cyrus says, are takers ever grateful? Maybe, maybe not. We also agreed he is entitled. Can entitled people ever be grateful? Most likely not. Thirdly, we recognize that he is non-appreciative. Can such people ever be grateful? Clearly not. Fourthly, he has endless expectations. Can such people ever be grateful? Most likely not. So why on earth would you expect him to be grateful? Once you take a look in his head, you are angry because he's behaving one way when everything tells you that you shouldn't be expecting him to be grateful. His lack of gratitude triggers your emotions. And instead of this trigger guiding you to look deeper into what he is teaching you, it makes you angry. If you responded to the trigger of ingratitude by being unemotional and almost clinical in your inquiry of what it is pointing you towards, you will accept that the behavior you are seeing from Julius is something to be expected and nothing to be annoyed about. With this understanding, you will accept him for who he is and maybe let him be and deal with him more intelligently going forward and not waste 3 days in anger and misery. He says, you can think of your emotional triggers as a torch in the darkness. These triggers are usually trying to tell you two things. Firstly, they are telling you to take a deeper look into the person or situation that is causing you to experience the trigger. They're pointing you to take a deeper look. Learn as much as you can from this person or situation, unemotionally. Secondly, they are telling you to take a deeper look at yourself, to recognize whether your own wiring or expectations or entitlements are reasonable or even realistic. So these triggers are pointing you to look in two directions, at the person, at the situation, and at yourself. I mean, you just saw how unrealistic it was for anyone to expect gratitude from Julius. Musa agrees. And he said, yet you let it cost you 3 days of misery and damage to your health. Therefore, you used your emotional trigger incorrectly. You should have used it to develop a deep understanding of people. And you can just about eliminate conflicts from your life if you use your emotional triggers correctly. Your triggers can help you walk along the path of zero conflict because you will find fewer and fewer things to get annoyed about. And you will be more and more accepting of people and things because you will understand them differently. That's why the trigger is gifted to you. The best tools, Cyrus says, in life are those that diminish themselves once their use has been fulfilled. So as you see life with less and less conflict, your triggers will take a back seat, and finally they will disappear completely. And they will disappear completely when you reach a level where you transcend your emotions and be above them rather than be their slave. This was Cyrus's lesson. And Musa was receiving nuggets of knowledge from Cyrus in spade loads today. Cyrus continued, one golden lesson you must learn, Musa, is to be and let be. To be and let be. And that is the mantra for achieving zero conflict. And he says, when you come across someone who triggers your emotions, treat the trigger as a torch in the darkness. It is telling you to look closely at something, and you will just about always find what you're looking for. If you don't let anger, disappointment, or any other emotion cloud your lesson. This way you will learn a lot from each person you encounter every day, and he or she will make you smarter. And you can take this knowledge and move on to the next lesson or experience you are to learn from. And you will just keep ticking new boxes of learning with each new encounter. So it was time for Cyrus to wrap up. And he says, Musa, let us finally take stock of how this new approach can add greater quality to your life and experience. Firstly, if you use your triggers correctly, you will begin to see people and situations very differently. Next, you will accept them for who they are. Thirdly, you will learn from them and then let them be. And he said you will gain a great deal of wisdom from this process. So when you have to make more complex decisions in life, you will find that this wisdom will come in very handy. It will serve as your constant beacon. And Cyrus further added, and what does wisdom bring at a level above the material? It brings enlightenment. Because the experience received from the correct use of your triggers and tools is of a much greater quality. A quality that helps you gain deeper knowledge. And this knowledge is light. And you achieve it by walking a path free of conflict. So all you're doing is making the most of every moment of your blessed time in this world to gain knowledge, rather than get derailed with anger and disasters, misusing your tools. Use them correctly. So Cyrus says, your emotional triggers, my dear Musa, are not a curse. They are your torch in the darkness that compel you to focus on areas where greater learning can be achieved. And Musa was completely mesmerized by the words of this beautiful angel. He said, I wish I had met you sooner. My life and health would have been so much better, Musa says to Cyrus. Cyrus looked at Musa and said, you have met me before. At the very beginning, in the garden of the Creator, before you took birth in this world. He says, we have met each other. And he said, do you remember what I said to your group of souls in the garden that time? I said to you, when you're in the material world, each one of you will be given tools to help guide yourselves and to guide one another. I also said that these tools will be placed in you in the most special places, in your body, mind, and emotions. Use them wisely, because they can be the best of tools for your journey and also the worst of weapons. It all depends on how you use them. He said, this is all I told you. And remember, I also said to you, trust me, when you get there, you will find out. Well, Musa, you've just found out. Your housekeeper, Julius, is your teacher, who was standing right next to you in the garden. And he has taught you a great lesson, my dear friend, without even knowing that he has taught you that. That's what the cycle of life is all about. The origin is light, light brings life, life brings experience, experience brings knowledge, and knowledge is light. And Musa was awestruck. And then suddenly all his light bulbs went on, and he remembered Cyrus, and he realized their conversation in the great gardens. And recognizing his great teacher, Musa smiled at Cyrus and bowed in gratitude. Now, this conversation between Cyrus and Musa takes me back almost 10 years from today, when we climbed up Mount Everest with the Shift group to do a meditation for global peace at a very special spot, about a day's journey away from base camp. And there's this plateau surrounded by peaks. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place to be. And we actually did that global meditation at 6 o'clock in the morning with the Shift group. And people all over the world meditated with us with the same purpose on that day. I was in crutches at the time, and I refused to take a helicopter up to the meditation site. And now, so I decided to use my crutches and to get all the help I could, and we made our way up. But all through my journey, I battled with one challenge which was very silly: my outer jacket. And it was supposed to keep me comfortable and warm. It had a defective zipper. And each time I tried to pull the zipper, even a little bit, the imperfections in the fabric got caught and made the zipper get stuck. So every imperfection was an absolute irritation for me. You can imagine doing your zip up in 5 to 6 stages. Very annoying. Now, you too would not be a happy camper, or climber in this case. But I ask myself today, what was the purpose of that zipper? To keep me warm. That was the purpose. And while the imperfections in the zipper made it difficult for me to maneuver, they were not my purpose. The imperfections were not my purpose. My purpose was to keep warm. Today I can recognize, especially from this conversation of Cyrus and Musa, that each imperfection in my zipper was not meant to be an irritant. It was something for me to learn from. Musa's housekeeper, Julius, was just like one of those imperfections in my jacket that came along as an inconvenience to help me keep my focus on the zipper and not to lose sight of why it was there in the first place. So our emotional triggers are like those imperfections in the jacket. We can get angry and use force and rip the jacket and then have to climb up the mountain freezing. Or we can learn to analyze each imperfection, how to navigate the zipper past it with greater ease and remain warm and happy all the way up the mountain. It's the same jacket, it's the same zipper, and the same imperfections. What we do with them differentiates between warmth and freezing. So it's a very small example, very simple example, but it carries a profound message, I think, to me anyway. So my dear friends, this is the insight I wanted to share with you today, and an insight which I hopefully allows us to navigate through life mindfully and intelligently and use our tools and triggers to the maximum benefit. Remember, in nature, nothing is created without a purpose, and purpose has two sides, positive and negative. Look for the positive.